Hi, I'm Lance.
And I'm Jenny.
And we're Crazy Empty Nest.
In this video, you're going to learn the latest strategies for protecting yourself and your loved ones when traveling abroad. Whether you're traveling in a group, or as a couple, or even solo female travel. We're embracing the next chapter by simplifying our lives, exploring our dreams, and connecting with what truly matters.
So in this video, we're going to show you where to stay, what to wear, how to know if somebody's following you, and make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video because we're also going to share with you how you can protect yourself digitally when traveling abroad.
In the last 25 years, we've lived and traveled all over the world, and sometimes Lance has found himself in some pretty sketchy places, like Iraq or Afghanistan, Nigeria, and even the Congo.
So this past weekend, I was out training some professional athletes, and we were going over the techniques and strategies that are used by the military, government diplomats, NGOs, and even people working undercover overseas. And these strategies are designed to reduce and mitigate risk when you're traveling abroad. So quick disclaimer, I'm a security consultant that teaches this to militaries, government agencies, NGOs, humanitarian organizations. And with that being said, there are certain things that I just cannot cover in this video because of security, clearance, non-disclosure agreements, all those types of things. Plus, it's a public video on the internet and the bad guys could watch this, so we don't want to give away some of the strategies and techniques that we teach, so just understand that. But I'm gonna try to give you as much information as possible, maybe even push the envelope a little bit, but just be, cognizant that when you're watching this video, this is barely scratching the surface. There's just certain things we don't want to say in public on a public video.
So Lance, I'm wondering, when I'm getting ready to go on a trip and it's the beginning stages, I'm booking my flight and all that good stuff, what are some steps I could take at the very beginning?
Yeah, so before you go anywhere, really planning and research is what you really want to do. You want to look at what are the dangers and threats to the place you're going. Now, you can go to, U.S. embassies and travel advisory websites for, Americans. The U.S. State Department puts out travel advisories for each country. If you're not an American citizen, look for your specific embassy, and there may be travel advisories for almost every country you're going to. There's also some, regular research you can do on the internet, and there's also a website called the Armed Conflict website, which I'll put a link to down below, which lists, recent activity like kidnappings or shootings or protests or anything like that for that specific area. It'll show you kind of what the threats are in that area. And really that's what we're looking for. We're looking to figure out what are the dangers and the threats for that specific country and area. Is it a terrorism threat? Is it a, just common criminal threat? Or is there, drug trafficking or human trafficking in that area? These are all the things you want to know. Or is it the government themselves that might be the threat, depending on what country you're going to? You want to understand all these, and you also want to look at the specific locations of dangers and threats, because, not everywhere, the entire country may not be a danger area. Specifically with a country like Honduras, Honduras, if you look at the country as a whole, it says, oh, there's all these murders and it's a lot of crime, but a lot of that is centralized into one specific area in the capital city. And there are other areas, tourist areas that are relatively safe and don't have any of those types of things at all. So you also want to look at that. What locations, what neighborhoods, what areas are you going to be most vulnerable to danger or threats? And that's really what you want to figure out ahead of time before you go anywhere. And then obviously you want to make sure you're not going to those areas. Now, I also want to put out a word of caution, because anytime you go doing research on the internet, you're gonna find people that are full of FUD. If you don't know what FUD is, that's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if you read reviews or you get on some of those travel websites, you're gonna hear people saying that the place you're going for vacation, oh, that's the most dangerous place in the whole world, I would never go there. You're gonna hear those types of things, okay? Well, let's just be honest. Let's say there's threats and dangers anywhere you go. But what we want to do is we want to understand what the threats are, what the locations are, and then understand how we're going to mitigate those threats, and don't get caught up in a lot of the fear mongering that that's prevalent on the internet.
So Lance, when we're booking our hotels and we're trying to figure out where to stay, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, so statistically, you're a lot more likely to be involved in an incident, terrorist attack, those types of things at bigger, higher touristy areas. and like chain or like brand name hotels. So my advice to you, and resorts for that matter. So my advice to you would be look at Airbnbs or more like boutique style hotels and resorts. Those are going to be your safer bet. Now, there's a whole nother reason why you want to stay away from the big name touristy or brand name resorts and hotels as well, that I can't get into the specifics necessarily on this video, but let me just say that sometimes your information can get shared with like anybody who's willing to pay a price when you stay at some of those bigger chains or local authorities, local police. So if you don't want people knowing where your whereabouts are on a day-to-day basis, it's a lot better to look at the Airbnb options and like boutique hotels and resorts. Sorry, I can't explain more of that. You got to just trust me when I tell you that, though.
So Lance, I'm going to ask the question that all the women are wondering. What do we wear?
Yeah, so you've got to balance. I mean, obviously, so look at things like, climate and season and all those types of things. But again, when it comes to safety, you got to balance safety and fashion. Now, loud colors are obviously going to stand out more, and you have to look at the local customs and cultures of the area you're going to be traveling in. So, specifically, like there was a country that I was in where everybody wore solid colors. Like you wouldn't see things like patterns or plaids or gingham or that type of stuff. It was everybody wore solid colors, and I didn't really realize it until I was there for a few days, and then I finally realized like nobody's wearing patterns, it's all solid colors. So there's things like that you have to take into consideration. You also have to look at, what are the cultural norms or, in that specific country. So some countries, for example, like only the tourists wear shorts. It's just not a thing for locals to wear shorts. So you can easily pick out tourists in a crowd by just looking and seeing who's wearing shorts, because the locals just don't wear shorts. Another thing to look at too is what are the cultural and custom of that area, because certain areas are more modest or conservative, maybe because of religious beliefs. And so it's really, if you're dressed or showing a little bit more skin than the normal population, you're going to naturally stand out. So the idea behind this, Jenny, is that we really want to blend in and not stand out. And granted, there's places you can go where maybe your skin color, you're just going to stand out. But what we want to do is try to use the clothes we wear to our advantage. So when we look into a crowd of people, you just don't want to be the person that stands out because you're wearing shorts or a neon pink shirt and you got a hat on or whatever. You don't want to look like the typical tourist. Also, you got to think of things of like slogans and brand names and stuff like that. So those just might not be prevalent in the area you're in, or specific Western style or European style brand names or labels and logos and stuff like that. Those just may not be the norm where you're at. So you really have to think about that when you're going there. And I would just ask the question, when you go out and you're in crowds of locals, do you look like you blend in or do you look like you stand out? Now, I've practiced this for a number of years now, and there's been instances where I've actually been mistaken for a local just by how I dressed, my demeanor, even like the way I walk. I tried to mimic the locals, and numerous times I've been mistaken as a local. So this stuff does work, and you just got to be cognizant of that. And again, I get it, ladies especially, balancing fashion with security, that's always something you have to take into consideration. But so there's some other obvious things too you want to think about, like are you wearing expensive jewelry or maybe like an expensive watch? You really have to think about that in some of the places you're going, especially more of your developing nations or areas where you might be in an area where it's a lot poorer. You don't want to make yourself a target or make yourself look like somebody that's vulnerable, that just may become a victim of crime and things like that. Another big one that people don't think about is in a lot of places, just wearing a backpack is a telltale sign that you're a tourist. So, that's the thing to think about, is if I'm carrying my backpack around town, you might stand out like a backpacker, or something like that. And there's certain situations where you can't just get around that, but you really want to think about these. And then when it also comes to backpacks, another thing I also recommend is that don't buy a brand new backpack and take that on your trip abroad with you, because brand new a lot of times signals money, expensive. You've got a lot of money, and they might want to, that makes you a target and vulnerable as well. So what you want to do is take that backpack out, use it a bunch, beat it up, get some wear and tear on it, throw some dirt on it, try to make it look like it's not an expensive piece of clothing before you go on your trip abroad. That's the best thing I can do. Again, you want to blend in, not stand out, and that goes with, you know, colors, clothing, labels, expensive jewelry, and things like that. Just think of everything you're wearing before you go out. Do I look like a local, or do I look like a tourist that somebody might want to take advantage of, or worse?
Again, Lance, another thing that's on a lot of women's minds when we're traveling abroad is, how can we know if we're being followed?
Yeah, so this is one, I mean, I think most women these days are pretty savvy. You guys know if there's a creeper following you home from the bar or whatever. You know, those guys that are a couple feet behind you or 10 feet behind you, those are pretty easy to spot. But when it comes to terrorists or criminals, a lot of times they get a lot more sophisticated with their surveillance and the ways they're going to follow you. So when we train this with our military and our government agencies, we spend months on this, but I'm really going to try to make it as simple as possible for the brevity of the video. It really comes down to situational awareness and controlling your environment. So a few years ago, there was a story where a guy, it was a metro in San Francisco, I believe is where it was at. A guy got on the metro with a gun in his hand, walked around on the metro for 2.5 minutes, and then ended up shooting somebody on the metro. I think it became a hate crime. And a lot of times people ask, how did a guy walk onto a metro train and walk around for a couple minutes without anybody saying anything or doing anything, right? Well, the reason why is because everybody was looking at their phones. Nobody even bothered to look up and see a guy walking around with a gun for 2.5 minutes before he ended up killing somebody. So that just comes down to poor situational awareness and people not paying attention to what's going on around them. So that's really something we want to be cognizant of, is our situational awareness at all times. Okay, again, for brevity's sake, and again, like I said, this takes weeks and months to actually get this down, but really what we're looking for is we want to look for anomalies in our environment, okay? There's simple things you can do too, like, I mean, just don't walk on the street side where cars are on the sidewalk. Walk more towards the building, because typically if you walk on the street side, it's easier to get grabbed or whatever, those types of things. When you're sitting in a restaurant, make sure you get a table or you're sitting in an area where you can see everybody who's coming in and out of the front door. You also want to make sure if there's a back door, maybe you can sit closer to that, to where if something does happen, you can get out the back door quickly. You have multiple egress ways is what we call it, to get out of there. So those are things you want to look at, but specifically when it comes to knowing if somebody's following you, you want to look for anomalies in the environment. So for example, let's say you come out of your hotel in the morning and you see, a guy or a vehicle. You want to make note of all these things you see. And it's not like the movies. They're not going to be right in front of you or standing on the corner looking at you like a weirdo. Those are really obvious. We're talking, they're typically going to be, a half a block, maybe even a block or more away. So when you come out in the morning, you don't want to, make it look like you're scoping the place out, but just kind of look around. And if you see a specific person or vehicle, just kind of make a mental note of it. Now, later on in the day, let's say you go out, you're doing some activities and stuff, and you go to lunch, and when you come out of the restaurant for lunch, you see that same person or that same vehicle. Okay, that is what I'd call an anomaly, because now you've seen that same person over time, distance, and a change of environment. So it could be a coincidence, and it depends on the place you're at. If you're on a small island or something like that, that's totally something that would happen. But it's an anomaly, and we just want to make note of that. Now, if you go out for dinner and you come out and the same guy in the same car is there 3 times in one day, I'm going to say, well, that might be, you might want to think about that. Maybe somebody's following you, or somebody's doing some surveillance on you, looking to maybe make you a target. There's other things you can do too, and specifically if you feel or you want to know if somebody's following you, rather than going from one point to say from your hotel to the restaurant, or your restaurant to the hotel, you want to add some little stops in there along the way. So maybe you go to one, you go to a shop, you spend some time in the shop, and then you look around and you see, like, do I see anybody that I saw previously? Or you do 2 or 3 of those little stops along your way back to your hotel, just to kind of see, am I seeing anything that looks familiar? Am I seeing any vehicles that look familiar? Those types of things are just going to help you be a little bit safer. Again, I know this is sounds a little bit crazy, but these are just ways, if you have that feeling, it's a way to kind of double check and make sure you can see if somebody is following you. Now, again, like I said, there's certain, legalities and liability issues. We spend months and months refining and honing these skills, and I really don't want to tell somebody something on here and end up with a liability issue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you 2 books, and I'll leave them down in the notes section. 2 books that really help you understand some of these ideas and these concepts and strategies a little bit better. So if you're really interested in figuring this out a little bit more, how to sift through crowds and pick out who are the anomalies, who might the bad guys be, I'm gonna leave those books down in the comments section. You can check those out.
Lance, in the past I've heard you say our phone is our best friend, but it can also be our worst enemy. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, phone, let's be honest, most people have smartphones in this day, but you have to remember that if you've got like a newer model iPhone, this is in some countries more than people make in a year or 6 months. I personally know somebody who was actually killed just for an iPhone. So I mean, you have to think about that even though this is commonplace for maybe Westerners or tourists, in a lot of parts of the world, this is a significant amount of money, and this is something that would make you a target. The other thing is, while these are great and they help our productivity and you know, they're a great piece of technology, they're also a very vulnerable piece of technology. So, you know, for example, you could be sitting in a cafe, maybe you've got the new AirPods in with your Bluetooth on. Well, because your Bluetooth is turned on, that makes you vulnerable. I could be sitting in that same cafe a few tables away, and I could easily hack into your phone through your Bluetooth because you've got your AirPods on. So you have to think about those things, and when you think about that, think of how much information and data is on your phone. So literally most people have family contacts, you know, financial and banking information, work information, what could be possibly in emails, not to mention that these things are basically a GPS, so everywhere you've been and everywhere you've gone is collected and held on that phone. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities when it comes to the phone. Now again, I get it. We're living in 2021. We're not going to go without our phones, but there is some things we can do to try to mitigate the risk when we're using our phones, you know, abroad and overseas. So with our personal phones and devices, the thing we want to remember is when we're going out in public, we want to make sure they're secure. So, you know, first and foremost, you want to have a really good VPN set up on your phone. You also want to make sure that, you know, any points of connection are turned off when you're in public. So Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, those types of things just need to be turned off. Maybe even your cellular data, depending on where you're at and what you're doing. You know, one thing that I always recommend is probably one of the safest things to do is you can always write down your contacts, write down some information on a piece of paper, and then when you get in country, buy a new phone, buy a brand new SIM card, so you're not necessarily having your personal device that has all that history on there. Now, one of the things you can do as well is if you have, you know, a local SIM card, whether it's in a device or maybe it's in a hotspot, those types of things, you can then, you know, in private again, not in public, but you can tether your personal phone to that SIM card or to that hotspot to be able to send messages or get data or check email or whatever you want to do. Now again, I would do that in more of a private setting, not a public setting, because that's a little bit more secure. And if you want to go even one step further to like super secure, that would be tethering, you know, your personal device to something, you know, turning everything off, all your cell data, everything, and tethering it to, you know, a satellite device like an Iridium Go or something like that. Now again, that's a lot more expensive, but it's a lot more secure. And in some places, like say if you're trekking through the Amazon, that might be your best bet because you're not going to have cellular connectivity, but you will have satellite connectivity as long as you can get through the canopy of the jungle and things like those. So those are just all things to think about when it comes to the vulnerabilities of phone. Another thing you really want to think about is posting pictures. Now, I told my kids, and especially my daughter, you're never allowed to post pictures in real time. So you don't want to, you know, hey, post a selfie out at the club where you've been drinking, because now you're telling everybody on social media where you're at and you've been drinking. You know, that can make you a vulnerability as well. So, you know, and not to mention our pictures a lot of times have metadata built in, which means dates, the date, the time the picture is taken, and sometimes the GPS coordinates of where it was taken at. So depending on the site, if you post that up and somebody has the software to be able to pull the metadata off, they can know exactly where you are and the exact grid coordinate, you know, the time, date, and the exact grid coordinates that you sent that picture from. So my best recommendation, what I told my kids, my daughter, is take all the pictures you want, but don't post anything on the internet, on social media till, you know, later, or maybe the next place you go to, post pictures from the last place you're at, that type of thing. Don't post pictures in real time, just because it makes you vulnerable, especially as women. I would say that's a big bonus tip there. So again, Jenny, we're just scratching the surface here. When I teach this, I mean, we're talking weeks, and months we spend deep diving and really practicing and honing a lot of these strategies and techniques. So this is just the abbreviated version for YouTube because we really can't get that in depth in a video or you guys are going to be falling asleep. But I hope this provided some value. I hope you guys got maybe learned some things out of this. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comments section. I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my ability without violating any non-disclosure or legalities. I will do that. Or if I can't, I will point you in the right direction or point you to a book where hopefully you can figure it out, and that way I don't get in trouble, but you can still get the information. And as always, guys,
Stay crazy.